all. I hope you can see a shared screen with my slide, and then as I hover over it, also a pad where I will a whiteboard where I will share different elements. Excellent. There's many of you out there in the virtual room from all over the globe. I understand 150 plus. That's super. It means we will not be able to have a live chat during the session, but nonetheless, of course, I will arrange to answer questions that will have been posted on the Q&A interface, webinar interface. So if you have any question with regards to the content of the webinar and you want answers from me, please post your short questions or comments, but better questions on the Q&A. And I will use as much as 20 minutes at the end to address orally these questions. And if you have any other questions about MethodsNet or any need for admin support during the webinar, you simply use the other interface, which is the chat interface. All right, excellent. Welcome to you all, and let me get in business with my core topic of today's webinar, which is the first MethodsNet free webinar in that format. I'm very happy also as MethodsNet chair to be the author of this very first webinar. And my topic of today is how to build your comparative case-based research design, which is a sort of a challenging enterprise because there are many ways you can do a comparative case-based research. And I'm going to navigate through multiple options and also a set of logical operations to build your comparative research project, whatever your discipline, whatever your substantive topic also. All right, let's set the stage a bit. I will use roughly 50 minutes for this webinar, then we'll use 20 plus minutes for the Q&As. All right, let me tell you a bit more about myself and how I became a comparativist. All right, so I was trained in political science, and I had initially quite broad interests also beyond political science, and I got engaged in multiple projects over the last 30 years. So I have began to become a comparativist by, let's say, being convinced of the added value of comparison via the multiple research projects on which I've been working across social sciences, broadly defined, or even beyond social sciences. I've also collaborated with people from physical geography and veterinary science, medicine also. And I've in many of these projects I've discovered I've received the confirmation that going comparative brings some added value. I was also initially trained both in qualitative and quantitative methods, and somewhere at the interface between these two, I could sort of locate myself as doing some systematic comparative research, because doing qualitative work usually entails working on very few units, typically the single case study, and quantitative I was mostly trained in survey research, and survey is much larger end, but then it's not case informed anyhow. You have a large matrix with multiple dataset observations, and that's something I was trained in, but I sort of got a bit. I saw kind of the limitations of that approach, and I also wanted to move back down to the cases, if I may say, which led me to the field of QCA, qualitative comparative analysis, which I personally frame as being part of a broader set of methods called configurational comparative methods that have been instrumental in disseminating and further developing. You can have a look at the compass.org website. That's my core, let's say my core expertise is around these methodologies. But today's topic is going to be much more about the broader picture of building comparative research way beyond the QCA methodology. What is my own current agenda as a comparativist? I would say, if I may cut a long story short, that maybe there's quite some of you in the room who are qualitative case-based researchers, right? And you work on very few cases, perhaps a single case study. And I would like perhaps then in that situation to convince you that you will gain a lot, you could gain a lot potentially by making the comparative jump and reconsider or enrich your project and go towards intermediate end designs where you're going to systematically compare multiple cases. My second agenda today, in these last few years, these last, let's say, 10 years, has been to try to bridge comparative research designs with mixed and multi-method designs, because you can think about your project as being a sequence of different steps. And in the different steps of your project, you could have actually different case selection strategies. And last but not least, I told you I'm really very much into QCA, meaning, which is a super toolbox for systematic cross-case comparison. But I want now to try with quite a number of fellow scholars from across the globe to try to bridge this with a kind of a difficult topic, but a very important one, which is within case or case-based complexity. In a way, there's a tension between taking into account within case complexity and systematic cross-case comparison, which is like a multiple case strategy. And in very short, some key authors that have inspired me in my travel towards being comparative in my research is, of course, Émile Durkheim, one of the founding fathers of social sciences, and he stated that there is no science without comparison. And of course, also Max Weber, who was not a comparativist, was actually much more of a single case researcher, but he can bridge actually Durkheim and Weber. In my field of political science, Stein Rokkan, a major macro comparativist, and also Aaron Leipart, a Dutch and then a North American colleague who worked a lot about systematic comparison, but mostly then pushing for a larger N comparison. And last but not least, my friend and close colleague, Charles Regin, who is the initiator of QCA and with whom I've been collaborating for many, many years. These are kind of interesting entries into all social scientists here, right? Into systematic comparison and why compare. Okay, what is this webinar about? At long last, let's come to the topic. I'm going to handpick some key elements or some focal points of a course I'm going to teach in Vienna this summer, 7 to 11 July 2025, a course called Comparative Research Designs. Note the S of designs, because there's actually multiple ways you can build a comparative project. So I'm going to handpick some points. I cannot cover them all. If you want to know more and get more, of course, you're welcome to the course, if you can make it to Vienna. I'll tell you more a bit about this course and also the event in which it is organized. It's the MethodsNET Summer School with the CEU in Vienna. Okay, here are some core topics, some core, let's say, here's a bird's eye view on a very simplified view of a research process that entails a comparison, a comparative project, empirical comparison across multiple cases potentially. The first step is why compare? Why should you go comparative? What is the added value, or which research goals will drive you towards empirical comparison, or what I define as being explicit comparison? Oh yes, by the way, I will mention in my webinar multiple definitions, and I will point to some points of debate. Of course, I cannot go into that, and there is of course much more in the full course. Then once you've decided to go comparative, is what to compare, and then this corresponds to three kind of major operations which are in a way very much intertwined. Or I think it's circular or at least iterative. It's first how to define my cases. What are my cases? That's what I call the casing operation. And then how many cases to encompass in my research? How many? And which ones? And there's not actually so much of a logical sequence between the three, but certainly there must be a bit of thinking about casing first. What are my cases? And then you can think about which ones and how many. But I don't see this as being so sequential. And in general, actually, this whole diagram is super simplified. Real life research is much more messier, right? It's about going back and forth, iterations, emergence. So again, much simplified. And then once you have selected your cases, that's the core issue here is also case selection, right? Is how to compare. That's the whole bit about data collection, data transformation or preparation or processing, and then data analysis when you do comparative research. That's also a very big topic. I will not have much time today to develop it. This will be on days 4 and 5 of the course in Vienna. So I'll especially zoom in on the why compare and what to compare, and especially casing and case selection today. Why compare cases? And I will unpack a bit the concept of cases in the next couple of slides. What is the added value? What is the decisive or specific added value of going comparative, i.e. choosing to deliberately, in a planned manner, to select a certain number of cases, so at least 2 cases for your research? And what is in particular the added value vis-a-vis the single case study, as was pushed by some founding fathers? It was mostly fathers, not mothers, of social science and neighboring disciplines, right? Like Max Weber. And secondly, what is the added value of selecting cases in the sense of entities you have quite some knowledge about, entities, empirical observable entities on which you can gather sort of multiple types of data and get some level of understanding, right? What does it bring in addition to what I call non-case informed large N research that produce large matrices, like for instance a big survey database where you have 1,500 respondents and 45 variables. It's a matrix with lines, data lines, what I call data set observations. These are not cases. Cases require some richer, let's say, evidence in a way. Also, and linked to this, why go beyond soft, unplanned comparison? Because you could say the researcher, especially if you're trained in a more qualitative, on the more qualitative side, for instance, as an ethnographer, going to the ground, right? You start with a case study, right? You're embedded in a certain community, for instance, right? And then you bump into some whatever discovery, and then you go and see and visit another community. This is what I call soft and planned comparison. And I would like to try to demonstrate that that's actually, at least when you want to go more intermediate N, it's very important to go for planned comparison. And third link question: why should you go comparative in terms of specifically comparing cases when you are doing non-experimental research? When you're doing observational research, which is still the bulk of what is done in social sciences, broadly defined, and in many other disciplines that are not experimental. Between brackets, I discussed this also in the full course. Of course, experiments are by nature very much or constitute very much a comparative enterprise, right? That's a long story, but we can talk about it also perhaps in your questions, if any. Now, what are the goals of comparison? So why should you go into and do a comparative project instead of a single case study or a large N research that does not comprise cases specifically, as I will define them a bit later today in my webinar. Charles Tilley has summarized quite neatly at least 4 added values of comparison. The first one does not seem to be comparative. In fact, it's you want to use the leverage of comparison to better understand or better contextualize one single case of reference. For instance, let me take a topic in my field of political science or contemporary history. You have the French Revolution, right, as a major case, and let me actually use this an example here, right? Hello and welcome. I hope you feel welcome to this webinar, right? So for instance, you have, let's say you have the French Revolution, right? The French Revolution as a specific case. And then you have a another, you believe it is a particularly important case of a national revolution, and you, in order to understand it better, you could contrast it, for instance, vis-a-vis another revolution, which could be, let's say, the Belgian national revolution, which took place a bit later, or for instance, also the Italian national revolution, which is also of a slightly different nature, or perhaps even versus, let's say, the Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution in the early 20th century. And it helps you to take a step back and to think about what is particularly unique, perhaps, or foundational about this specific case, and to better understand it, to zoom back into the French case, which is your case of reference. That's one way to summarize this argument. So you are a case specialist, and you use other cases to improve your leverage, your understanding, to take a step back, and also because taking a step back also sometimes enables you to discover some things that you could not see from up close on your case of reference. For instance, if you are a French researcher going out there and traveling and meeting colleagues in Belgium, Russia, and Italy, and discussing the French Revolution case with the colleagues, enables you to also discover new things, rethink, or let's say, yes, refresh your mind, perhaps find new and refreshing ideas to illuminate your own case of reference. A second important goal of comparison, which is actually sometimes overlooked and underexploited, is to use empirical comparison to produce a taxonomy or a typology of some sort. Bottom line, classification. In my main course in Vienna, I kind of unpack the concrete operations and the key differences between taxonomy and typology. It's quite different, actually. Now, classifications are super important in many sciences, because it creates, it enables you to reduce the noise and to classify and to place some sort of order or structure around phenomena, including emerging phenomena, to get a better understanding, and then you can go towards other steps in your research. It could be an intermediate step in your research. Somebody who was, of course, a founding father of classifications in social sciences, broadly defined, is for instance, Aristotle, right? In his typology of political regimes, and so on and so forth. But classification can also be seen as something very dynamic, not only static. It's very useful as a research goal. I cannot say much more today in this short webinar. And of course, most people would say that comparison is very strong, is a strong strategy when you go for, especially in intermediate end designs with more than 20, 30, or even more cases, to test theories, or to at least confront theories with evidence. Okay, there is a big point of discussion here. Can you actually test theories in human sciences? Long story cut short, you cannot fully test them as you would test them in, say, in physics or in chemistry, but you can go quite some way. Okay, and you can address why research questions, causal, explanatory research questions, which requires indeed that you collect evidence on multiple cases that are diverse, and that are also contrasted, especially on an outcome variable of some sort. And this enables you then, via the systematic case selection, to produce empirical generalization and to engage in some form of inference. That's also a big topic I cannot unpack here much in detail. And potentially, some scholars will say that via multiple observations, multiple comparisons, you could potentially engage in prediction. Personally, I'm sort of cautious about this. You can probably predict via multiple experiments. After you've done like thousands of experiments, perhaps you can predict future behavior of some stakeholders or something, but probably not via observational designs, observational selection of observed cases, not that you do not manipulate like you would do in experiments. All right. So wrapping up this first question, why compare? That as you can see, of course, I kind of summarize the key points. I stick to the big picture. Here are some tricks of the trade. I'm going to give you also some tricks of the trade for the next 2-3 steps when you do if you want to do a really robust comparative research design. Well, first, choose one of these 4 main goals upstream, quite early in the research process. And you may perhaps reconsider it along the way, but it's good to think about, having a strong starting point. Secondly, reflect really early on how to define your cases. I will actually discuss casing right afterwards in the next slide, because casing is a kind of a difficult operation. I'll come back to that. At least try to make develop some first hints on what your cases could be in your research. Third, choose your own definition of generalization of inference. Do you have a more statistical view? Do you have a more open view? It's pretty important too. And fourth and not least, make your own arbitration, at least initially, in terms of depth versus breadth. Okay, this is a big topic that I would like to summarize via a small graph. It's a really classical thing when you think about comparison. Okay, so when you do comparative research, you have basically an arbitration across two axes, okay? And the first axis is how many units, right? The number of units, number of cases you will examine in your project, in your research. And it could be a very small n. It could be an n of 1, only one case. It could be a few, let's say 5 cases or units. It could be 50. It could be 500, right? Or it could be many more, like thousands or millions potentially. And then the other, and this is breadth, the sheer diversity and number of observations or units of analysis, especially. And then you have the second axis, which is the depth of knowledge on each and every one of the cases. How much information do you have? How much understanding do you have for each one of the units? Charles Regan, my fellow friend and colleague, would say, how much intimacy do you have with each one of the cases, potentially? And there is something like sort of a law that I would say that in the real life, what happens is this. The more units you encompass in your research, the less depth you know, the less you know about each one of the units. It's simply because you don't have so much time, and you can only, for instance, if you do a survey research, you mostly gather standardized numerical data, and you don't know so much about each respondent, right, qualitatively. But by contrast, if you do a single case study, right, you know a great deal about one single case, right? But of course, what you miss is the potential to generalize empirically because you only have one observation. So I would say that, in fact, what you should do in whatever project, in your project, right, is to think about where you're going to place the line, right? How high, how much depth do you want to acquire for each and every observation or case or unit of analysis? So are you going to place the bar pretty high because you want to gain a level of understanding, right? In that case, right here, right here, it means you should go for really small n research. Or do you really want to make very strong inferences across very diverse and numerous cases? Is this what you want, and you're not so preoccupied so much by depth, right? Okay, but then you can go for large n research, right? Large n research, large n design. And somewhere in between, you have a very interesting area. I will use another color here, all right? Maybe indigo, all right? Somewhere in between, you have a really interesting zone here, right? Around here, which is intermediate, somewhere in between, say, maybe 10, 15, 20 cases and around maybe perhaps 100 potentially, depends on the data, access to databases. Perhaps there is a really interesting area around here, right? Where what I call intermediate n designs, in which you can have both some level of depth and some level of breadth, and for which actually QCA is designed which is one of the topics I discuss in my course, and there's also 2 full courses at the MethodsNET Summer School on QCA. Personally, I really very much like to do this kind of intermediate in research, which is challenging and also very, very rich because it bridges 2 worlds: the world of empirical diversity and breadth, and the world of empirical depth. Okay, here is a long story cut short. All right. Then second topic is what is a case? This is the first sub-question of what to compare. Before you discuss which ones you're going to handpick, which cases and how many, you should of course first probably have a preliminary or working definition of what a case is. It's possibly one of the most challenging operations. Do you have a lot of time for this today? Yes, possibly. If I do enter this into detail, we will not have time for other topics. So yeah, just come to my course and we can discuss it much further. That's of course a joke, but there is so much to say. It's a very actually challenging operation. But if I want to summarize, when you think about your casing, it is actually intertwined with the theories or the literature you have around your empirical entities and with your research questions. So when you think about cases, think about it like as a triangle. You have your potential cases, things that you're reflecting upon, and this is actually very much interconnected. On the one hand, with your theories in your field, the existing theories, and it also has to do with your research question. Your research question is framed in a certain way and calls potentially for a certain type of case. That's okay, a long story cut short. So don't reflect about cases in a vacuum. Reflect about cases in connection with theories and in connection with your research question or questions, which itself, the research question, is connected, of course, to your research goals. Everything is interconnected. And your research questions could take different forms. A what is research question, a how research question, or a why research question. This is another topic I discussed in the course at length. That's pretty crucial. Yeah, I also mentioned theories, of course, and hypotheses, because as you know, by definition, hypotheses are derived or contained, derived from theories or are contained in theories. Okay, so see this as a dynamic interplay, not as starting just from observation of some empirical reality, but think about it in a very abductive manner. This is perhaps an important buzzword here, something I've come across in the last few years, very important, abduction. So be abductive, abduction. So it's in between, right? It's a back and forth between deduction and induction. So thinking about cases is best, I think, conducted in an abductive way. Again, a big topic. I cannot unpack so much. Now, what you need to do in any case at some stage is to circumscribe what I may define as a natural population that is not so questionable, that fellow colleagues or observers will agree with your definition of the population. Some situations are quite easy, especially if you work on some topics that are kind of formalized. Let's say that you have a firm, you're doing management research, right? You have a firm. It is very well circumscribed. It is a formalized entity, and this firm has a certain number of subunits that are also very well defined. Maybe let's say a certain number of branches or shops, right? And each one of these shops in the firm, in the bigger company is a case. That's kind of an easy situation, even though these cases might maybe perhaps intertwined in multiple ways, but the empirical contours of these units of the population is quite clear. A certain shop belongs to the firm, or not, right? They're all these shops actually belong to the to the larger company. But of course, when you look at it a bit further, there may be some special cases, right? Maybe there's some shops that are, perhaps owned by another company, or there's joint ownership, right? There may be some special cases out there, right? Maybe boundary cases, even in a seemingly simple situation. Okay. So most frequently, when you look at the real social world, whatever your discipline, when you look at political, social, cultural elements, when you look also at individuals being cases potentially, or small group dynamics, whatever your discipline, the situation is a bit more complex, more tricky, and you need to to go out there and look at these populations and look at the actual empirical contours and delineation of your cases and the population. For instance, in my own PhD research that was a long time ago in the 20th century, all right, I was working on green parties, okay? Green parties in Western Europe, green parties, that was my topic. There was quite a solid, how should I say, literature on how to define these green parties with 4 criteria. So I could say this is a green party, this is not a green party. But okay, but what do you do with very young, very young party organizations or parties, and these are, let's say, proto parties, soon to be parties or parties in the making? Are they also parties already, right? And what do you do with parties that may be, let's say, green, or let's say that are red-green parties? Red-green parties, are they still, green parties? Some of them are very green and then with a bit of red, and so on and so forth. So you have so many, idiosyncratic questions you have to ask yourself when you look at a case. And what do you do, for instance, with micro parties? Because they're very small. Perhaps because the country is very small. Let's say there was actually a green party in Liechtenstein. A very, very small state. It is a state with a political system. It has a party, a green party. Do I consider it as being part of my population, in my Western European population of parties, potentially? What do I do with the case of the Green Party of Luxembourg, right? It's a very small country, but it has a full parliament, a full political system. Can I compare it with the Green Party of, say, of the whole of West Germany? It was before the fall of the wall, most of it, right, of West Germany in the 1980s, which is a much, much larger system. So the Great Duchy of Luxembourg, right, is smaller than most of the German Länder, state entities. So can you compare Luxembourg, which is in a very small system, with a green party for the whole of West Germany, and so on and so forth? See, these are tricky questions. So typically what you have to do is you have to delineate quite carefully the population, and you have to make some arguments. And these arguments need to be data informed and context informed. It's not automatized. It requires that you get your hands dirty with some observation on the ground and looking at different sources, go multi-data, quite some exploration. Other big question, of course, is at which cases are your cases pitched? Are your cases individuals? Are these agents? Are these potentially okay, and here, of course, this is discipline specific. If you are a psychologist, your cases by definition are individuals, most likely. If you're a macro sociologist, it would be like much larger systems. So you can have agents, and these agents, for instance, let me take the case of civil servants, and these agents operate in, say, units or small units in a much larger unit. Much larger organization, right? Let's say ministry with different subunits, etc., etc. And so you could define your cases as being civil servants. That's micro level cases. You could define your case as being the whole, let's say, a small group entity, like a small subunit. That's more like meso level. You could consider the whole organization that's still also meso level. And of course, this organization here, right, this ministry is part of a much larger system with many other organizations, let's say the public policy-making system or the political administration system of a certain country or region, and this is macro level. Now, each level is valid, right, potentially to define your cases, but it depends, it's a major choice to make. And long story cut short, your decision to go micro or meso or macro to define your cases is very much discipline dependent, but also depends on your theories that tell you that your cases, the relevant level is at this or that level. But sometimes you have to arbitrate yourself. In my own PhD research, I was kind of hesitating between looking at the party structures, like meso level, versus looking at the party players, like party leaders or party subunits, one level down. Another big question, of course, is can you or should you take into account elements of case-based or within case complexity? This is a huge topic, no time to go into it, but here are some buzzwords: complex systems, nestedness, multi-levelness. I mean, observable entities, human entities, and phenomena are by definition or are objectively, I would say, complex. And sometimes even making this simple distinction between micro, meso, and macro is already very simplistic. Things are so much more complex. It's also very much about fuzziness, the fuzziness of boundaries of real life cases or real life systems. Interesting topics here to unpack in a much longer course, of course. But nonetheless, okay, here I can give you at least a working definition or an operational definition of what a case should be in very concrete terms. You need 4 elements to define empirically a case for the purpose of performing systematic comparison, especially. So it is a unit of analysis, which you should, of course, distinguish from a unit of observation. It can be pitched at a certain level, but your data can be collected at multiple levels. But especially as a qualifier, it should be observable quite directly as a distinct, I would add, as a distinct empirical entity, distinct from other entities. Like 2 civil servants in a certain administration cell, right? They are 2 distinct individuals. It's objective. You can observe that these are 2 different persons. Each one of these units of analysis is bounded in time and space. In time, so you observe it over a certain time. It could be a snapshot, or it could be over a certain time period, which is a huge topic that I cannot unpack right now. And you also must bound it in space. Where is it located? In a certain municipality, a certain region, a certain province, whatever, a space. And this is also where perhaps the micro, meso, macro distinction also comes into place. And last but not least, you need to be able to place this case with the right and naming it by the right concept in the research question. Again, I'm unpacking this much more in the full course. Now, the casing operation is very challenging in many ways. It's perhaps the most difficult thing to do, especially when you do original research, like a PhD type research, when you want to go in depth. And here are some other topics that you should consider. I have no time to go into them in detail. There is a major issue, which is so-called issue of limited empirical diversity. Okay, major topic we could discuss perhaps in the Q&As. There is the issue of boundary cases, which I already alluded to. And it is a difficult arbitration. Should I keep the boundary cases in or out of my comparative research design? There's arguments on both sides. And of course, a huge topic is, and a classical one, is which are the adequate concepts to name my cases, to label my cases. So the whole issue of concept building, and what I demonstrate in my full course and what I unpack is the right concepts that you should use when you do comparative research, especially. You should make sure that your concepts are able to travel across cases, that they are able to cover a whole set of cases or a population actually, or a subpopulation of units. And it is also quite tricky to do. So tricks of the trade for casing, because I see that time is moving. First, you should formulate, it's a really good idea to formulate a step one research question, at least a temporary working research question with a temporary casing, temporary, let's say, location, time, and space. Think through then, secondly, the outcome. I mean, what you want to explain. In quantitative research, you would call this the dependent variable, right? Critically assess the solidity and the robustness of the existing theories and concepts. Don't take them for granted. Don't be afraid to look around for alternatives, or perhaps to make your own concept building. Fourth, try to think about the population, and the one way to think about it is start from a very typical case, a case that is undisputably in the population, and then try to expand from this typical case. Fifth, one great way to really try to consolidate your casing is to exploit existing case monographs if they exist in your field, or even better, because then you get your hands dirty and you gain first-hand knowledge, is to conduct an exploratory case study. It takes quite some time, but it's really worth as an investment. And then, pragmatically, you could keep your casing quite open for a while, and then you will gradually consolidate it further down the road when you go towards case selection, because you might bump into some difficulties and then re-interrogate your casing. Okay, that's for the big topic of casing. And I chose to be quite systematic about this one, because that's perhaps the most challenging one. Now, at the heart of my course, in 2 days' time, I discuss multiple ways to select cases. So the whole question of case selection strategies. It is not super complex. You just have to have a clear view of the options and what is the best suited option for your purpose, for your research project. Nonetheless, a very important, let's say, first arbitration is, will you engage in selection or in sampling? Again, I discussed this in depth in the full course, but long story cut short, a case selection is really about handpicking. It's more like a manual operation that requires, let's say, first-hand knowledge of the case. That requires quite some, let's say, some primary data and quite thorough contextual knowledge. Whereas sampling is a much more automated operation. It could be performed by a computer, basically. I know this is not so much highlighted in literature. Some colleagues will say that you could do something called purposive sampling, but I don't like the idea of purposive sampling. It's either selection, which is you handpick cases, or sampling, which is something very different. Sampling is automated. And I discuss at length the two logics, the two rationales are pretty different, actually, of selection and sampling. Okay, so how many cases should you choose for your project? That's the question of how many cases. I also discussed this at length. We could have a long discussion about it. Perhaps there could be a few Q&As on this in the chat, if any, right? What you should know is that there is always a cost and a benefit in any strategy. You cannot win on all fronts. So for instance, if you go very small n, and that's the first strategy, the first possibility, say 2 or 3 or 4 cases, very small n comparison, then okay, a great advantage is that you can get in-depth knowledge on the cases. You go on the depth side of things, but of course you miss diversity and you miss leverage for much broader generalization, and so on and so forth. And there's multiple other pros and cons. So 3 strategies are possible: very small n, intermediate n, or medium n. There's no clear boundary, but I would say from my part somewhere in between 10, 12, let's say, and 50 plus. This would be medium n, and then larger n, which could go potentially from a few hundred or 100 or so plus to millions, potentially even more. But then if you go to thousands and millions, it is not case informed anymore. At least you don't have information about each and every case. About the case selection options, there's many of them, and I have tried to examine in an orderly manner, in a systematic manner, the options of case selections following a certain order, which I discuss at length in roughly a day and a half in the full course, moving from basic and simple and robust, in fact, options, which you should always consider. They're pretty strong, actually, and moving towards more complex or advanced options, where especially you add up some dimensions of complexity, time, space, nestedness, which then leads you to complexify the whole operation and also to multiply the number of cases in many ways. Now, I have absolutely no time to discuss all the 15 of them. I've just handpicked two, all right, two classics, that you can find in literature. For instance, of course, a very classical option, that's number 4 in my sequence, is the classical binary comparison or paired comparison, as discussed by Sidney Tarrow, for instance, in a very good piece. So his name is Sidney Tarrow, a major North American scholar, Tarrow, in an article, I think in 2011, if I remember correctly, about paired and pairwise comparison, paired comparison. All right. So what is this strategy about? It is actually a basic, the smallest n strategy that is an MSDO strategy or option. MS meaning most similar cases, and DO meaning with a different outcome. Most similar systems or cases that display a different outcome in spite of being similar, in spite of sharing some contextual features and definitional features. Two comparable cases. And so you first define a population by convention. This shape outlines what is inside the population, what is out of the population, and then you handpick two cases. One case, which is, say, a positive case. By convention, let's use a green color for a positive case, a case that runs, let's say, that confirms, so to speak, that goes in line with the theory, with expectations from theory. And then also you look at another puzzling case, a case that is sort of counter-theoretical, and you compare these two cases via two case studies. And potentially you could also go through, exploit something a bit more systematic. If you have a strong causal reasoning, you can also do something like a comparative process tracing across these two cases. Let's take, for instance, these two cases could be, for instance, as an example in political science, the case of Algeria here. Algeria in the late, around 2010, 2011, 2012. And this red case could be Tunisia, right? These are and were two authoritarian systems in the Middle East, North African countries, in Maghreb, right, with Morocco, along with Morocco. And both countries were witnessing some social tensions and a bit of social unrest, or actually more than a bit. At some stage, surprisingly, the Tunisian system collapsed. Normally, these systems do not collapse because they have a strong repression apparatus, and they don't collapse. They find ways to repress the population and so on, and they survive thanks to strong military and strong security and intelligence apparatus. So Tunisia is a puzzling case. So maybe there must have been something special about the internal workings of Tunisia that was not in the theory out there, right? Whereas Algeria, and not only in 2010-11, but also before that, there were some quite significant periods of unrest, even like a civil war at some stage, and it did not collapse. So Algeria is like the theory-compliant case that, in fact, most authoritarian systems are long-lasting, especially when there is a very strong military apparatus that is able to stay on for a long time, even beyond the rotation of the head of state. Okay. That's one example among many. I need to conclude shortly. So here is the second classic, which is also an MSDO design, synchronic, meaning that it's like a snapshot. We don't take into account the time dimension. And it is the instance of a population. Let's take, let's say, the 27 EU countries. So the context is the EU, and let's take a certain policy, let's say directive that is developed in Brussels by the European Commission. And some countries, these cases, right? Okay, let's imagine that there's 27. Some countries are able to swiftly implement the directive, and some other countries are not able to swiftly implement the directive. Positive versus negative outcome. This is also called a MSSD design, most similar systems design. Each one of these countries is part of the EU, shares a number of shared features in their legal system, their whatever else, and yet, in spite of these similarities, in part of being part of the EU and having developed also the procedures, they are successful or not. And here is the puzzle. And you could test, typically when you have such a design, you could test some hypotheses or models of some sort via QCA, for instance, because you have an intermediate n design. The n is too small to perform statistical analyses with just a small n, but with QCA you can really gain a lot in terms of unpacking, identifying the key causal conjunctures or the key combinations of conditions leading to this positive or negative outcome. All right, so two examples. Note that this option, the binary comparison, right, MSDO comparison, and the multiple case comparison, MSDO, these two are very much the same logic. Simply that the multi-case MSDO just multiplies the observations and enables you to cover more diversity. By the way, in this example also, you have a really neat, interesting feature of multiple case comparison is that you cover the whole population of EU countries in my example, right? It's not even a sample. You can cover the whole population if you do things right. And of course, in this example, for instance, of directives, you do not, how should I say, consider adding in the candidate countries that are not yet in the EU. They're really outside of the population. Okay. A few tricks of the trade about case selection. I told you there's many possibilities. I just showed you two of them. It's really a good idea to think through different options, to make some sort of thought experiments and to see, okay, tell yourself, what if I were to choose this or that strategy or option? What are the pros and cons? What would I gain? What would I lose? Now, sometimes you also bounce or bump into difficulties. So what you might be led to do is to reconsider your casing. Perhaps, for instance, let's say that let's take the case of Belgium. Belgium is an EU member, right? And there is the issue of implementing directives in Belgium. And Belgium is really not a good implementer of EU directives, surprisingly, because even though Brussels is based in Belgium. And the reason is that implementation sometimes is carried out at the subnational level. In Belgium is a federal state, so perhaps the cases should not be should not be the nation state like Belgium. It should be the two or three, actually three regions in Belgium for socioeconomic policy, for instance. And in Germany, it should be not one case, it should be 16 cases, a 16 Länder in Germany, and so on. All right. And last important trick of the trade, I've discovered in my own experience that sometimes the simple and basic and robust options are okay, that you can simply go for a simple case selection strategy. Of course, you can perhaps enrich the design very much when you integrate things like, nestedness, multi-levelness, time, space. The time dimension is actually very rich potentially to enrich your design. All right, I've already talked for 52 minutes, I think. So let me come close to the conclusion. Yes, this is, of course, sort of a humoristic statement or a teaser, right? I have no time now to discuss about the next step in my initial graph: data collection, data management, and preparation, data processing, and then data analysis when you do systematic cross-case comparison. I'm using, I'm discussing a lot of this on days 4 and 5 of the course, and I especially discussed the ways you can combine different methods, case-based methods, QCA, statistical methods, how you can integrate this in your research project. And I discuss also some specific challenges and tricks and very concrete ways in which you can compile, organize your data, transform it, following a case-based logic, and keeping, especially multi-data. I would say going multi-data is like the buzzword, which comes along with multiple challenges, but there's many toolboxes out there. And this is also linked with other topics from other courses at the summer school, by the way. All right, this is it for my webinar content-wise. I mean, in regards to comparative research designs. Please don't jump out because I would like to tell you a few words about my course and the summer school, and then I will stay around for Q&As, which hopefully I will handpick some topics from the chat, and hopefully this will be of interest for many of you in the room. Okay. So this teaser, this short webinar is based on my course that I will teach at the summer school of MethodsNet Summer School that is hosted by the Central European University in Vienna. A great place to see you on 7 to 11 July. You have everything on the website of MethodsNet. You can get much more information. It's part of a rich offer of comparative and case-based courses. I'm just going to show you one page here with the web page of the summer school, right? And in particular, you can scroll down and you can see the course list, and there is a full list of 6 courses that are case-based and comparative, and you can actually combine these courses in 2-week sequence, also with especially courses that are more on the qualitative side up there, and also more on the statistical side up there, but you can really combine them in many ways. Okay, you can of course contact MethodsNet if you have any questions. You can also contact the instructors. And if you're interested in my course, I mean, really welcome in Vienna. I've been teaching this for 15 plus years, and I've been able to help many researchers in their own projects. My philosophy of the course is really to provide individual advice to each and every researcher in the room, and I use very interactive pedagogy. I have one-to-one advice moments. We work in subgroups, and you get collective intelligence around your projects, and I also jump in as let's say a more seasoned expert. All right, and of course you can also see more on the website about the summer school concept, and what is really great about this concept, which we've been designing around the last 4 years and refining, is that in addition to your main course that you can take every week for the in-person courses from 7 to 18 July, there's also some free transversal or cross-cutting courses. Actually, I'm going to teach one of them in week 1 about data collection analysis with a fellow colleague who is more of a qualitativist, and we're going to discuss some toolboxes that may be common across methodologies. There's a lot to learn across methodologies. So have a look at this concept, and the summer school concept is also to make it very accessible to you in terms of the fee structure. If you register for early bird as a student, the full week package, meaning the full course with full service, like all day round, basically, plus the transversal courses, 2 of them per week, is less than 550 euros. You won't get a better deal elsewhere, if I may use a marketing language. Okay, and we are also stand for top pedagogy. Last but not least, I'm also chair of MethodsNet, so I'm changing hats here. Have a look at the MethodsNet benefits page of MethodsNet, and especially if you're a PhD student or a young researcher, there's like a dozen benefits. Especially you can join the MethodsNet communities, which are just being launched right now. The web page is being designed as we speak, and if you become a member, you will get access directly to this digital interface. These are called communities. We have designed 6 of them. It's a rich communication interface between experts and users. And one of these communities is called case-based and comparative approaches. So you can stay in touch and get in touch with fellow researchers using comparative methods and case-based methods, and dialogue and exchange information with experts in the field. For instance, I will upload, or we will upload this webinar on this community, and we will continue to have a discussion around some core topics, for instance, if you have any questions via the community. Now, in order to join these communities, well, you need to become a member of MethodsNET, and you can see all the information on the page. And it's the cost is very symbolic if you're a student. It's maximum 49 euros per year, or less, depending on where you are based. And it's also very accessible for post students, let's say postdocs or professionals or scholars. Also wanted to flag that you, of course, get discounts, major discounts at our events. So for instance, if you pay this 49 euros as a student member for 2025, you have a 150 euro discount for the summer school for one week course, or even 300 euros if it's 2 weeks. So of course, it's super interesting for you. Last but not least, I wanted to flag the second MethodsNet conference. That's the next upcoming activity that will take place in Belgium. And I wanted to especially flag the fact that it is not only open to methods experts, it's also open to methods users, so to researchers who have work in progress, and you can submit papers with empirical pieces where, of course, you would be asked, especially to unpack the methods side of the piece, right? To get feedback from experts on the methods side. So the calls will be out in a couple of weeks, and you can register to our newsletter and be informed when please see our website, and you can see you will get notification of when the calls are out. I would say roughly in a few weeks' time, and then you will be able to submit paper proposal, even perhaps panel proposals by sometime in May. I assume we're still fine-tuning the dates. All right. I spoke, I think, for 1 hour sharp, including this small advertisement about MethodsNet. I also wanted to say in 15 seconds that MethodsNet is great it's kind of unique as an organization because it really brings globally methods experts and methods users, right? And you can really learn a lot. Both can learn from the others, and it brings people from multiple disciplines. Time that sometimes you can discover really very interesting solutions to your problems. So you look at the solutions of fellow colleagues from other neighboring disciplines. I've learned this myself in many projects. Okay, this is it, and let's have time now for Q&As, and I will access now the chat. I hope I can see it here, right? I can see some thank yous in the chat, and all right. Yes, I will see whether I get questions of content. I will also ask Anna to write to me if she can perhaps copy paste some, because I see there is a very long chat. Please stay on, all of you, for a few minutes. I just need to identify questions. Or perhaps another option would be that you retype down your key question or questions, and I find them at the bottom of the chat. But if I'm just browsing right now, I'm in the middle of the question. These were questions more about MethodsNet, not really oh, sorry, it's not Q&A. Sorry, I was in the chat. My mistake. Q&As. Okay, all right. Here I found it. Yes, my apologies. So let me try to answer the questions that I think you can visualize in the Q&As. And I can see that there are a number of questions. I will try to yes, I can see 5, 6 questions. Let me try to take them in order. Open question, or perhaps Anna, can you confirm that in the chat that or in the Q&As that participants can see the posts of the other participants? Can you confirm this, please, in the chat or by voice? So I hope you can read. Can anybody tell me whether, because it's the first experiment, right? Whether in the chat perhaps, yes, we can see Q&A. Okay, great, thank you. So I'm back to the Q&A, and I'm gonna go to the first question. I'm going to read it about the trade-off between large N and small N studies. What is my stance on the set theoretic multi-method research approach suggested by Carsten Schneider? I'm going to share my screen and also type in a few other names in this right here, right? So this whole debate is a very interesting one. And there is a rich literature from 2013 onwards, or into 2018 onwards. There's multiple pieces, sorry, by Ingo Rolfing, has contributed to the debate. Also, Derek Beach, my fellow colleague and fellow MethodsNET executive board member and process tracing specialist. Yeah, and quite some other pieces by fellow colleagues. All right. And especially Carsten Schneider that you mentioned here, Kocha, has contributed via a very recent book that just came out. Yeah, personally, I'm very much, I believe in the strength of this strategy because it enables you to articulate or to sequence in different ways systematic comparison with QCA, right? That's what I would call a QCA first strategy, right? You can use QCA as a step one, right? Across multiple units, right? And then as a step two, right? You zoom in on some specific cases, let's say this one, or perhaps we can use another color, positive negative cases, where you could zoom in on a negative case or a positive case, much more in depth, looking at the causal mechanisms within each one and every case. Because indeed the limitation of QCA is that it gives you some equations or formulas, right? It doesn't tell you about the causality, actually, or the actual causal mechanisms. It handpicks, it sheds lights on key combinations, but does not unpack causality. I've also discussed recently, and I can most likely share this as a full text resource somehow with all of you if you want to. We can arrange this via the communities or perhaps even simply via email. I could also share a piece that I published a few years ago. So myself, Rihoux, Ala Mosconcha, and Lobe. It was in a textbook by Onweg, Boudzier, and Johnson, who are Onweg, Boudzier, and Johnson, two fellow colleagues from UK, North America, and USA. Johnson, in a really good book about mixed method research, mixed and multi-method research. And my main point, I need to say short here, is that you can combine QCA with case-based research or case-based toolboxes in multiple ways. We discussed 5 main approaches, and SMMR is one of the 5 possibilities. It's not the only one, but it's a powerful one in principle. I think the main challenge, perhaps, is time. The sheer time it necessitates. You need to devote to a full, very solid QC on the one hand, which is mostly a data collection challenge. Also, there is some elements of the QC procedure itself that are kind of demanding for a very fine-grained QCA, which requires possibly multiple iterations. Bottom line, it is time-consuming. And then the process tracing part is also quite demanding, pretty demanding, as you may know, Kocha. Especially the fact that you need very, very strong primary evidence, especially if you follow the route of Derek Beach's. Sorry, not the Derek. It's Derek Beach, of course. Derek Beach. Because Derek Beach suggests that you need to gather very strong primary evidence, to gather smoking gun evidence really on the ground to establish causal mechanisms. Okay, that's for Kocha. So a great design in principle. It's a sequential mixed method design, in fact. Do you have any recommendation for further literature? 2-3 key readings. I gave a few here. It depends on your field. It's an anonymous question. In my field of political science, there are some good textbooks by B. Guy Peters, and also there's a good textbook by Todd Landman, Landman wrote a nice book, accessible book about comparative research in political science and international relations and conflict studies. But then in the full course I'm delivering, I have a very extensive list of literature, and I discuss this at length in the course. What you can also do simply, this is the suggestion, you can also go in your own field and look at some good empirical pieces in your own discipline as for guidance. And you can, of course, look at the classics of comparative methodology. The classic could also be, of course, Giovanni Sartori, everything about comparison and comparison in concept building. You could also have a look at the work by Bartolini, Stefano Bartolini about how to integrate time in comparison. These are sort of kind of major entries. But it's a big topic, as you could see today, and so I could give you multiple recommendations on readings depending on the sub-question, if I may say. What is limited empirical diversity? Okay. Long story. Now, it's a contrast between social sciences or observational sciences and empirical sciences. Sorry, and experimental sciences. In experimental sciences, you can actually, in principle, manipulate, like in chemistry or in physics, you can, in principle, manipulate all, let's say, all factors, all properties. Let's say that you have the water temperature, right? The water temperature is one parameter in physics, right? And you can manipulate it from 0 degrees centigrade, right, to 100 degrees centigrade. And you can actually, if you have a very fine thermometer, you can actually observe each by milli degree centigrade. You can actually produce the whole variation and observe the full variation, right? And also the same goes for, let's say, for atmospheric pressure, right? Pressure from zero bar, right, to maybe 1,000 bar. I don't know how much, right? And you could reproduce. You can actually measure and manipulate this around the whole scale. So a simple way to state the contrast is when you observe, let's say, countries or firms or individuals, you don't observe this full diversity on all the dimensions. It just does not exist. In even a sample of 1,000 respondents in a survey, they don't display all the potential combinations of diverse values on each one of the variables. And so the social world, the observable world in social sciences, broadly defined, is always limited. And then this means that you cannot observe, let alone manipulate, right, or the full variation on all the factors. That's one way to define limited empirical diversity. And if you use a QCA logic, and you can visualize the diversity also in the form of set diagrams or Venn diagrams in QCA. So for instance, if you have a certain model, right, in QCA with a certain outcome value for a number of cases, case 1, case 2, case 3, etc., case 4, etc., and you have a certain number of conditions, condition A, B, C, and D. Let's say that you have positive and negative values on the conditions. Case 1 would be, let's say, negative, positive, and a positive outcome on these conditions A, B, C, D. The other one would be, let's say, 1, 1, 0, and so on, 1, 1, 1, if you follow me, all right? And let's imagine that you have 20 cases. Well, these 20 cases will never cover the logical space, the potential logical space of logically possible values or combinations of factors. You will never observe the full logical diversity, potential logical diversity. So empirical diversity is always, observed empirical diversity is always less broad, let's say, than the logical diversity. That's my answer in short. All right, from Sylvia, thank you for giving your name, Sylvia. You want to discuss, okay, you examine participation pathways over time with an outcome variable, right? With 4 groups, okay, or 4 values. Oops. All right. I'm back to Sylvia. There's more questions. Okay. All right. Okay. Uh-huh. Okay. So in fact, you have an outcome which is not dichotomous, right? Which, if I got it right, Sylvia, which in fact is a bit more complex with multiple values. Then one simple strategy, there could be some other ones. One simple strategy would be to identify a benchmark, or let's say a threshold that would enable you to meaningfully dichotomize your outcome. That's one possibility. And then you would have instead of 4 condition value, you would have 2, let's say. For instance, you could say yes, yes, but I can see indeed that it's a bit tricky. That's because it's not, let's say, it's categorical, but it's not really ordinal in a certain way. It's a bit more complex. Mhm. Another possibility would be to have a much more small n approach, potentially to zoom in on 4 special cases that illustrate your 4 specific, let's say, situations. But it would require a closer look at your data. Perhaps, Sylvia, you could write to me a short email with a bit more precise question, perhaps with a whatever data table of some sort. We can exchange about it in short, or even better, if you're not yet a method member, join the community of case-based and comparative approaches community in MethodsNET. I can take part in the discussion, but yeah, you can reach out. Already quite precise. Do we provision to have this our course online? Not at this stage, but it is possible. We are offering 4 courses online, but not this one, because this one really, how should I say, really is designed for deep interaction. I've taught this online during the COVID-19 period. It was super difficult to do so. Yeah, we get it. And MethodsNet strategically is trying to will develop some online formats, which also maybe shorter, perhaps. We might work on shorter formats. But yeah, thus far we have opted strategically to mostly offer a majority, let's say, of in-person courses. But I fully get the access question here. What we might also do, perhaps in the future, is debate sessions, or one day, whatever format, something shorter, but it takes quite some organization. So thank you for this reflection about online training. But online training, of course, also has its own limitations, as we all know. How can you link a question from Julien, statistical analysis of text with these theoretical frameworks? I don't immediately see the let's say the connection with my topics of today, because indeed quantitative text analysis is really very much corpus oriented and large N, and sort of can be kind of automatized, right? Like the content analysis approach and so on. Nonetheless, what you could, the way I could frame the link here, perhaps with Julien, is that what you could do is look at the text as such. I mean, the corpus of each text. I don't know what your texts are. Let's say if these are party manifestos or whatever, or political discourses or whatever, or meeting summaries. You could say something about the cases. I mean, the corpus, each corpus item, each text, each manuscript could be a case, and it could perhaps give you some element of contextual knowledge. But the link is not so obvious. But I would need a bit more elements, Julien, to answer more precisely. Yes, absolutely. Derek Beach, to Pamela and Moss. Yes, indeed. Yes, there are some pieces not only by Derek Beach, but also There is some work in progress with also Hilde van Meidenburg, who is going to deliver with Derek Beach a webinar, by the way, in 2 days' time on process tracing, and teaching a course also in Vienna. So Hilde van Meidenburg, I'll try not to Meidenburg, based in Leiden, Netherlands, and also Patrick Mello are working together on some pieces. Patrick Mello is a QCA expert, but also mixed method expert, fellow colleague with a very neat textbook on QCA too, came out a few years ago. Yes, and indeed, there is a neat connection between comparative process tracing and QCA. There's also actually a neat connection, Pamela, between QCA, process tracing potentially, and the so-called comparative historical analysis, CHA, comparative historical analysis. There's also a course on this at the summer school, which is yet another approach. I mean, there's multiple ways to compare cases meaningfully. Yes. I haven't myself specifically written on the linkage between comparative process tracing and QCA. Nonetheless, in the classical SMMR design that is advocated by Schneider and Beach, and also Beach and Rolfing, what you typically do eventually is to have to handpick 2 or 3 potentially cases for the process tracing part. So there is already a linkage with comparative process tracing, but I think there is a strong potential in exploiting further this comparative process tracing avenue, with a note of caution nonetheless, because as you may know, Pamela, I mean, process tracing, if you really want to go in depth, is super demanding data-wise, evidence-wise, and so perhaps then you have to be a bit less ambitious. But anyhow, I think here is the link with my main topic here. When you go comparative, you lose depth by definition, but then you gain some other stuff. You gain more leverage for empirical comparison. You can also establish common patterns. So you gain on some side, and you lose depth on each and every case. That's logically. I will shortly conclude, because it's already close to 5:30 at the time of recording. All right. In demography, question from Ilknur. Yes, a good question. I should have a look at it. Ilknur, I cannot tell you very precisely right now. I don't have one that really pops to my mind, because demography is very much up till recently into, let's say, mainstream statistical designs and methods. There is, though, increasingly some mixed method work in demography, but mostly qualitative, bridging qualitative and quantitative. It is not the main component of demography or population science, as you may know. I could not really actually give you a hint, but I would probably sort of go for mixed method research in demography, and then you would probably find some resources. I'm not a demographer myself. Possibly you will find some interesting comparative research design projects and publications in the field of education research, right? Education research, which is also partly a field that is, let's say, connected on the quantitative side with demography, where there are some nice QCA and systematic comparison projects and publications. But again, it is far from my specialization. Last question from Justin. Okay. You want to compare cases that feel like you want to compare dissimilar cases. For instance, the US, and on the one hand, on the other hand, some smaller European countries. Yes, it is a specific strategy that I have not discussed here, right? Is when you want to compare, let me try to make a small graph, right? When you want to compare, let's say, on the one hand, a large country, right? Let's say the US, right? And then in another context, let's say in the European context, right? You have some other, let's say, smaller countries. Let's say Luxembourg, Lithuania, and let's say Slovenia. it relates actually to the question of what is a case, and what is comparable. It depends on your research question. If your question is, let's say, is about, I don't know, is about the way that local administrations are organized, maybe the comparison between the US and some European countries is fully valid, regardless of the sheer size of the country or whatever. And simply you need to take into account some contextual differences. But sometimes you could say that if I take another same example, the US is a particular political system with specific, let's say, cultural features, and perhaps the European systems, for certain reasons, let's say, are different, let's say, objects, different kinds of fruits. For instance, if you take um, 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 Luxembourg. Okay, Luxembourg is not a republic, and it is not a federal state, and it is not a pluralist democracy. It's more of a consensus-driven democracy with a very different system, right? So in fact, Luxembourg in many ways is very, very remote. Let's say I'm going to take the case of Luxembourg here, right? And then US here, right? This case of Luxembourg is very, very different from the case of the US, and it's actually not possible to compare it with the US. Vice versa, let's say Slovenia technically is Slovenia, let's say this case here, right, is Slovenia here is a presidential system. There is a president of the republic, if I remember correctly, in Slovenia, so you could compare it with the US at a certain level. So the comparability of cases is always a matter of argumentation. So there was actually some really good works by what's his name, Matej Dogan, Dogn, in some textbooks around comparison. And that's perhaps a nice conclusion to today's webinar. Argued that the comparability or the similarity of cases in the real world, in the real observable world, is always disputable, always partial. Is never fully, there's nothing like full similarity or full dissimilarity in the social world. So that's it from me. I hope you found this webinar interesting, and I hope you can stay connected with us and with MethodsNet, and that you can also join some other webinars. Thank you for your attention, and have a good day or night or morning. I will now stop sharing.